will ask you for a few minutes, and we don't have much time, like it would take 5-10 minutes, to put yourself in the skin of a director of operations of a major international humanitarian organization. And you are not a legal advisor. Please forget about this for a few minutes. And remember, there is also rarely a clearly right or wrong answer. That's the very essence of a dilemma. So indeed, do not hesitate to state what you think about those dilemmas. Your organization, your director of operations, has been active for years in a country affected by civil war between the government and a rebellion in the remote west of the country. Your NGO has been able so far to maintain access, although it regularly suffers from restrictions imposed by the government. But it does have access. Not easy, but it has access. As the violence increases, the government faces growing international condemnation for its military tactics that severely impacts the civilian population. Maybe the use of torture, for instance, massively. A petition has been launched by some NGOs asking for the government to be brought in front of the International Criminal Court. And your colleague, the Communication and Advocacy Director, wants definitely your organization to sign the petition. Please, by raising your hand, do you think this is acceptable to sign this petition? Who thinks it's acceptable as a director of operations, having the principles in mind? Nobody? So raise your hand, those thinking that it's unacceptable. Wow, well, close to consensus. There are a few that are like on the line, not quite sure. So maybe, why do you see this as, or in order to know why you think it's unacceptable, mostly what principles are at stake in this instance? And here I think we are getting to your question. What are the principles at stake here? Neutrality, impartiality. Is humanity at stake? Indeed, all are at stake one way or another, but maybe those that are the most directly at stake, and maybe intention, and here we get to your question, are certainly humanity and this kind of moral imperative to do something, including to ensure greater protection of the civilian population that suffers, and increasingly so, in this conflict, and then neutrality. I mean, somebody mentioned neutrality. Why is it at stake? Who would like to react on this?
Well, it's a political issue.
Microphone.
I repeat, maybe for those who haven't heard, maybe it's a political issue, and so that goes against neutrality. But why is like seizing the International Criminal Court, is it a political issue?
So I would say two things. One, there's a difference between the means and the ends. So I think the ICRC's means or neutrality means, even though it is to advance, of course, justice and accountability and everything, the way it works is undercover and not really publicly, and so sort of engages with the parties and gets results. That's one thing, the difference between the means and the end. And the second thing is that although fighting impunity or ending impunity is not political in itself, there are different stages of the international criminal process. And for example, if you see the ICRC, actually I wanted to raise that as a question, so it's nice that we have it now. The ICRC's position on giving testimony in front of, I don't know, the ICTY, etc. There have been several very well-known cases, and that put the ICRC in a very difficult position. So you can say that giving a testimony, even witness testimony, can be political, but because of this principle of neutrality, the ICRC asked to be sort of alleviated from the completely legal obligation. So if that's right within the absolutely criminal process, of course it will be right at the first stage of petition, where the criminal professionals or international criminal professionals still haven't said anything about it. So.
Yes, indeed, that's a very important point that you raised. I will come back to you in 1 second. Indeed, for the ICRC, considering that the importance that neutrality and being perceived as a neutral party has in our action, we indeed managed to get this immunities of testimony. I mean, you would use a more correct word than me in front of the ICC and some international criminal jurisdiction. And for us, it's essential or critical in order to carry out our work. But so thanks for bringing this up. What I wanted to raise here is this typical dilemma between, indeed, humanitarian action and justice. And both satisfy this ideal of humanity. However, justice, as you rightly pointed out, creates some tensions with our ability to be accepted by all. I mean, justice, well, the International Criminal Court, for instance, an indictment by the International Criminal Court might be perceived as a political act, as it was in the past in some countries. I mean, you all have in mind Sudan, certainly, where this resulted in the eviction of, this kind of situation resulted in the eviction of 16 or 17 non-governmental organizations. Manu, did you want to react?
I was just going to, this particular conversation
yeah, that works.
Struck me that perhaps we should have said something right at the outset, which is what organizations should comply with the principles. Not every NGO should comply with them. It depends what you want to do. It's those wishing to carry out humanitarian action, so provide relief, carry out some very specific protection activities in the field. If you want to carry those out, it's a very good idea for you to comply with the principles and, as you point out, be seen, be perceived as complying with them. Someone mentioned an NGO that engages in human rights advocacy. Obviously, that strives towards the same end goal of promoting compliance with the law, but it goes about it in a very different way. It faces very different challenges. It doesn't have operations in the field that a party that feels aggrieved by the way you've behaved can just interrupt. So let's bear it in mind. It's not as if they are principles of how NGOs should behave. They are addressed and relevant to those who want to carry out particular activities that require them to be close to people in the field. But I think this is a very interesting conversation that we're having on how different actors who have the same ultimate common goal of providing protection by compliance with the law should engage with accountability mechanisms. We've mentioned the ICC, ICTY. What about sanctions mechanisms? Increasingly, they are going to actors in the field to figure out not just how the sanctions, whether the sanctions are having a humanitarian impact, but also who are the violators, who's committing violations. If you are an actor in the field, do you engage with them? A very live question that different actors have a different reply to. ICRC is very lucky. I used to be ICRC. It was very lucky. It was very easy to say, sorry, but no. When I was at the UN, we were in a far more complex position because we have to cooperate with the ICC, for example, but we still have operations in the field. How do you balance this?
Right, and that's precisely why it is so critical for organizations to be also honest about their own limitations. As we said before, being neutral and independent, it's not an end in itself. It enables us to carry out our humanitarian mission and to do so in an impartial manner by being accepted by the parties in a given conflict. When organizations, either because of external constraints or because of institutional choices, decide to take some positions, for instance, that would be at odds with neutrality, is it not a humanitarian organization anymore? Wouldn't be well placed to say that. It might be that in their particular circumstances, they have anyway a very restricted access. They do not manage to have access. And in their calculus, they consider that in order to contribute to the protection of these people, maybe, yes, that could help to this ultimate protection objective. Yet, then we would expect those actors to be more honest and transparent about those decisions, and then to recognize that in this particular case, they are not seen and perceived as neutral, and that they are not delivering this neutral and independent humanitarian action rather than contribute to this blurring of lines between organizations. We are a very diverse lot of actors and very complementary too, but with each one more or less not in the same position to abide by all those principles that we are discussing today.